Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Electric Violin Shop live stream. We've got a really cool stream for you today. We're going to be talking about transferring technique from your acoustic violin to your electric. Most people who play electric start out on acoustic and they get real good at it. And then they pick up an electric and they go, wait, the stuff that I was doing with my acoustic doesn't necessarily translate 100% to my electric. So we've assembled a panel with some buddies of mine that are, and I'm in a text thread with a bunch of people, and I thought, well, who has the most experience on acoustic and electric, play both at a very high and professional level, and are good teachers? And here they are. These are the people right here. So we're going to add one more. So we've got Dr. David Wallace. He's in Boston. We've got Joe Deninzon, who's in transit right now between Kansas shows. He's in an airport in Salt Lake City. We've got Chuck Bontrager, the soon-to-be Dr. Chuck Bontrager, who's driving through Chicago on his way to a rehearsal. And we've got the recently released composer Earl Maneein calling in from New York. He just wrote a concerto for Rachel Barton Pine. It was recorded by the Scottish National Symphony. Shostakovich got to be the B-side to your concerto, right?
Reverse, man. I'm always
there are no
the
B-sides anymore.
Yeah.
So these four cats probably have more time professionally on acoustic and professionally on electric than just about anybody I know. So I thought, and they're all fantastic teachers. So I thought I'd get some input from them on what they think some of the technique differences are. And we're going to start with Joe because he's on a layover and he may have to leave us soon to go hop on an airplane.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Matt. What's up? So, do you want to ask me a question, or should I just talk?
Yeah, I would suggest any thoughts you have about like when you get good at playing the acoustic, when you first pick up an electric, like what are the first things that you think I might need to do this differently for the electric to sound right?
Well, I bought my first electric in the mid '90s. It was a 6-string Jensen. It was like 1996, and the first thing I noticed was the intonation is a little bit different and the angles of the strings, because I went for a 6-string. So that took getting used to. I spent like a month practicing etudes and just playing on it to get used to it. And then because I got myself in a lot of situations where I was actually playing electric, I would constantly go back and forth between acoustic and electric. So I would have to make the adjustment, like switching gears. And I say to people, I think electric violin is, or viola or cello is a rare instrument because the deeper you get into it, the more it becomes its own thing. You can be a violinist and buy a 4-string Yamaha or any 4-string electric, and it'll feel sort of similar. But then if you want to get into 5, 6, and even 7 strings, it's gonna be a different instrument. And as you get deeper into sound production, working with effects, and working with amps and preamps and all that stuff, there's even more intricacies and variables. So I think a lot of traditional players get frustrated because they expect it to feel like their acoustic instrument and sound that way. And it's really, I think if you approach it with a mindset that it's really its own beast, then, and it takes patience and practice, then I think that's a healthier way to look at it. And I even think, people that double on violin and viola, approach viola as a different instrument. The intonation is different, the strings are different, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's even more differences between playing acoustic and electric violin if you get deep into the rabbit hole like I did.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing I want to say. I think you have to really treat it like its own instrument with its own skill set that is required in addition to your traditional technique that you've spent years developing.
Yeah. What do you think? What things do you think do apply from one side to the other?
You mean the commonalities? Or?
Yeah. What are the commonalities in technique between, like, what things are actually just going to work for you?
Well, I think, if you have great bowing technique, good intonation, and just your foundational skills on your instrument, that'll work for you right away. But you have to learn how to EQ your instrument. It's not plug and play. A lot of violinists say, "Hey, man, you get this question all the time. What's the best EQ for my violin?"
Right.
And that depends on what you're using. Are you playing through an amp? Is the amp kind of tuned with more treble frequencies for guitar? Is it a bass amp? Are you using what preamp are you using? So all of those things just to get a warm sound. I mean, there's things that work for me that Earl might prefer to use something else, and I know he does. So it's a personal choice. But I think if you have a good technical foundation on the instrument, that's really a good start. But also getting used to your sound coming from an amplifier or your in-ears or a wedge monitor rather than just up against your instruments. That's another huge adjustment for people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird to hear it coming from someplace other than under your ear.
Exactly. And you get used to it. That's just
Yeah.
the nature of the game.
Absolutely.
So I think I want to live in a world where violinists are like guitarists. You have a collection of acoustic guitars you take for certain gigs, and your collection of electric solid body guitars you take for certain gigs. That's kind of where I'm at, and I think we're getting to that place. And I own multiple instruments. Different acoustic instruments I use for different kinds of acoustic gigs, different electric instruments for different kinds of electric gigs. You can really get deep into that. I would play a different kind of instrument on a jazz gig than I would on a classical gig at Carnegie Hall playing in an orchestra or something, than I would playing with Kansas or with Stratospheerius. So.
Well, you're a guitarist as well, so would you draw some of the same parallels between acoustic guitar and electric guitar that you do between acoustic violin and electric violin?
Absolutely, yeah. The necks are a little thinner on some electric guitars. You might use a different gauge strings. Obviously, having the hollow body instrument, you can play acoustically versus something where the sound is completely reliant on outside sources like amps or monitors, in-ear or wedge monitors. So it's a lot of similar discrepancies, So yeah, but that's just if you're a guitar player, you expect that. That's part of the gig. You're going to be playing. I mean, some guitar players only play acoustic guitar, and some only play or primarily play electric guitar, and that's fine too. It depends what kind of work you end up doing and what you're passionate about. And if you're interested in being as diverse as possible, it's great to be able to play both acoustic and electric, and have great sound production and know how to manage those instruments and make them shine.
Awesome. Hey, let's hit Chuck. He's driving on his way to a rehearsal right now. Chuck, what are some of your thoughts on like technique differences between acoustic and electric?
Technique differences. Oh, that's a good one. In my case, I think it depends a lot on the type of music that I'm playing. So I'm on my way to a rehearsal for the opening of Hamilton here in Chicago, which is a very different kind of gig. That's on an acoustic violin, and it's a very different kind of gig than I use my electrics for. The stuff I do on electrics tends to be stealing parts from guitarists. I spend a lot of time on the fifth and the sixth and the seventh string and under a lot of distortion. And in those cases, yes, I'm definitely using different techniques than I tend to use on the violin or even on the viola. Although a lot of the techniques that I use are derived from the viola work that I did with my viola professors in college, Lee Kuo Chan and Peter Slowick. A lot of hanging of the arm, getting the weight of the arm into your sound, using gravity rather than using the weight of gravity rather than the force of your muscle. And that's great when you're imitating guitar sustain on the 2 or 3 lowest strings, and you've got a power chord that has to be held out for several seconds. That kind of hanging of weight functions very well and is related to, but very much a step beyond what I learned as far as quasi traditional viola technique. Another thing that is not so traditional is the idea of letting the amplifier do the work. And this stems from the differences, I think, between between electrics and acoustics, especially if you're playing more than 5 strings, because your string spacing is going to be noticeably narrower, more narrow. The strings are closer together. And in order to get all those strings on that one bridge and not have your bow angle be vertical, the amount of string arc that you have, the amount of bridge arc that you have between strings is also reduced. So you have to be very, very efficient. Um, I find even more efficient and more exact on my electrics than on my acoustics, especially if I'm playing on the middle 3 strings of my 7 string. I know when you add the amplifier and the distortion, hopefully it comes out sounding like Metallica, but that's the most Mozart-y playing I ever do. The most precise, and in many ways the most, or at least that's what I'm going for. You can listen to me and be the judge, but what I'm going for is the most elegant, reliable bow technique that I ever use. How's that for starters?
Beautiful. And let's jump over to Earl. Earl and Earl and Chuck are probably the 2 heaviest violinists that I know. You got Sage Cornelius in there too, but like you guys, and it's funny how you guys are both like super, super heavy players, but you attack that very, very differently, right?
Yeah, sure. Well, Chuck, I don't know if Chuck and I are that different. I don't know, man. What do you think, Chuck? I think we're kind of the same, especially we play sort of similar. We can play similar sort of the riffing stuff. I think we have to be in the same. I mean, physics is physics, right?
Sure, sure.
Um,
But I think that, and this is just that I think this is by virtue of the fact that most of what I do, guitar covers, and you have done it, and thank goodness you've done this, because you are like the one true church in this. A 7-string electric fiddle player who spends most of their time down on the 6th and 7th strings playing their own original music. And so some of the techniques that you use are adapted from that, the types of sounds that you want to create. I'm a wall of, I think I'm pretty good at like the wall of sound, sustaining 3 or 4 notes, like rhythm guitar type stuff. But contrastingly, your machine gun at the frog, super staccato stuff is, I mean, I've tried to do it and I can't do it. You're the only person that I've ever seen do it. So it's 2 different techniques, mutually supportive within the same arena.
sure. I guess I'd buy that. And thank you. You're being a little too kind over here. You've played my band stuff and you sound fine. So I don't know about me being the only guy that can do that stuff. Anyway, but so I guess for my contribution to it, I think your original question, Matt, I think my my takeaway is that Joe said something a long time ago that I thought was super valid for a lot of the string players out there that are trying to adapt to uh, electric. And Joe said, so I don't want to take credit for it, but I'm going to remind him that he said it. Is that like the violin is really only at this point, the electric violin is only like 50% of your instrument, right? Like a lot of like newbie string players, that try to like just get an electric, they're used to their entire sound coming from just the body of their instrument, and
Mhm.
so that they show up at like whatever job they're there for, or show they're playing with a hollow bodied instrument with like some new distortion pedal that they bought at like Guitar Center or Sam Ash or whatever, and like expecting, and then having not tried the equipment also, right? And then they'll come and they'll put it on, and it'll just be feedback the whole way because they didn't consider. like anything that happened after, like they didn't consider the chord, they didn't consider the quarter inch coming from there. Where is it going to? It's going to a distortion pedal. What does that do? How does it affect it? Like there's a whole 50% of the sound that happens after after the signals leave the actual body of the instrument that I think string players are generally unaccustomed to. So I think it would be good advice for that education to kind of be a main part, very, very important part of what newbie string players are thinking, that transition from um, electric from acoustic to electric. Because I don't really want to get into my stuff too, because that's so nichey, and I don't really know how many people are out there are actually trying to do like weird angular dissonant riffs at 220 the quarter. So, I don't really know.
Well, they will soon, man. Once they get to know your stuff more, they're gonna have imitators, you know. But what I was gonna, to your point, man, when I play the electric violin, I'm playing the pedals as much as the instrument. And when I teach other electric violin players, we spend a lot of time like, what's the best distortion for this section of the song? Maybe that's a little too abrasive. How do you work the wah pedal? Maybe you don't need to go toe up all the time. There's all these intricacies with each sound. What's the best kind of delay? Maybe you need to lower the feedback or lower the mix. So that's a whole other learning curve. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate it or take it seriously enough, maybe. Did you, am I losing you? Everyone's frozen.
No, we got you.
All right, cool. I think I'm freezing, but I'm got to go soon anyway. But that's my 2 cents. And the other thing I want to say, Chuck and Earl were talking about playing on the lower strings. The other thing I found, a lot of players are afraid, if they get extended range, they're afraid of those low strings. And I encourage people to just dive right in to the deep end of the pool. When I play with Kansas, I actually sold them on this. I double all the guitar lines on the low strings with distortion. They like that fat sound. And when I do solo looping, I walk bass lines on the B flat and F. And in my original music, I write parts for those strings into it. You just got to attack those strings and not be afraid of them. And that's a whole new experience. And again, it is going to be a different bow angle, and you're going to have to play sometimes vertically, like straight down, bow straight down, because of the spectrum of the strings. When I'm playing on the E, I'm bowing to the floor, you know. And like I said, it's a different technique. And I think I encourage people to just have patience and work at it, and not expect it to, because you may be an amazing violinist, you might be a Heifetz or a Hilary Hahn, but when you pick up like what Earl has in his hands, there's a learning curve, and you might not sound great right away, and
See,
that's
look what
it
Joe's
is
talking
what it
about.
is. You know?
This is exactly what
Yeah.
Joe's talking about. Look, see where my arm is? My arm is actually like glued to my side. It's actually here on the E string. This is what Joe's talking about. This is not the
Yep.
normal angle of
It
a
is not.
violin. Absolutely not. So this
Yeah.
is like. So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to kind of visually
Yeah.
show.
No, thank you, because I don't have my instrument with me. So yeah. Anyway, I love you guys, but I do have to run. And I love this conversation, and I look forward to listening to what you guys have to say and reading the comments. So,
Yeah, man. Travel
Carry
safe.
on, my wayward son.
rock on, brothers and sisters.
Yo,
Thanks, Matt.
have a safe flight, Joe. The day Joe got the gig, I was working some wedding and I played "Carry On, Wayward Son" at the end of every song I did.
No,
everyone.
That's funny. But actually, the day I got the call, I was in the hospital because I cut my finger, and I was supposed to do a gig for Earl, and I had to get a sub like on super short notice because I chopped off part of my finger cutting a salad. So I was in the ER getting stitches, and I got the Kansas text at that moment, which was very bizarre. But enough about that. All right, I'll let you guys go.
All right, we'll see you, man. Thank you. Beautiful stuff. Yes, Chuck.
Before we get too far away from this particular topic, if you're about to switch fields, Matt, I think it's important to realize that there are Okay, so there are many more options in terms of styles of music that you might want to play and gadgets that you can use to achieve those sounds and the types of instrument and the number of strings. But I think it's important for folks who are fresh or still in the classical, the glorious classical ivory tower. There are absolutely analogs for every one of these concepts that we're talking about. There are out there using very different instruments, very different bows, viols, gambas, create, right? There are violinists out there who have classical setups and romantic setups. So the different options for kinds of music, that's not a new concept. Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think we did actually get a little bit of a interruption there, but that's all right. It'll be fine.
I
Don't
think we got the
don't be
general gist
afraid
of
of all of the options.
Yeah, very much.
Also, actually, to piggyback on what Chuck was saying, because I think I understood it. Although sometimes they say understanding a little bit is more dangerous than not, right? But what to piggyback on it, the other day I was having a conversation with this guy named Trey Spruance, who, if I don't know if you guys know who that guy is. Trey Spruance was is not was he is the guitarist for Mr. Bungle, and he also the group Mr. Bungle, which is one of the most like seriously experimental, coming from rooted in metal, but way more than metal. And then also he's got a band called Secret Chiefs 3, which is absolutely like uh one of the most interesting musical things out there, in my opinion. And he's just a deep dude. And I was having lunch with this guy, and he talked about something that I think is appropriate here. He was saying that he laughed about the idea of the idea that tonality was being destroyed after following the Second Viennese School, which for those of listeners who don't know, it's like the guys like Webern and Berg and like the 12 tone things going on and doing things in tone rows, right? So the idea that tonality was being destroyed. And Trey said that is like one of the most Western arrogant things I've ever heard, because that was, because if you think about Indian music, or you think about, Indian or Persian music, all the semitones that are present there, how can you destroy tonality when you're really only thinking about like, diatonic harmony? How do you destroy things that like you haven't even addressed? So this is, so to think about that, to bring it to this back to this conversation, it's not I think when you go from acoustic to electric, it's good to kind of have it to understand that you're entering a violin adjacent thing, that you're not it's not it is a violin, and then you're like there, but like I would shed the sort of preconceived notions of like, oh well, I'm gonna play with this Mozartian, and that's what reminded me what Chuck was saying, like I'm gonna play with this Mozartian sort of like elegant kind of thing here, and I'm gonna like do all those rules. They still exist, but you're not bound by them, and you're entering a new paradigm. It's a different paradigm. So that's the thing that I wanted to kind of piggyback on Chuck, where he was saying that like, you have these sort of rules that everybody in the music school kind of like gets accustomed to, and I'm not saying to throw them out, but understand when they're applicable and when they're not.
Yeah. You know who thinks about this stuff more than anybody probably is David Wallace, and thinks about all this stuff and how to teach it. So if you guys don't know, he's the head of the string department at Berklee in Boston, and he's spent more than a little bit of time figuring out how to teach some of these things to really fantastic players. So what are your thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, there's an old adage that's kind of cliche, but it bears repeating, that technique it should always be a means to an end, not an end unto itself. And so it's not like, okay, well, I'm learning tenths so I can play tenths or shred, but it's like, no, you're learning them because there's an aesthetic reason that you want to use them. And I think for any instrument I'm playing, any style of music I'm playing, and any student I'm teaching, technique begins with a very clear concept of sound. What is the sound you want? And the technique is how you get it in the least with the least amount of effort and in the most direct and efficient way. I think that's part of what Chuck was saying about kind of Mozartian technique with Metallica transcriptions, is to play fast metal cleanly with distortion. You've got to be ultra precise, and you can't be moving around a lot or doing a lot of extra motions. But if you got to be as precise with your right hand as James Hetfield is with his. So, I mean, I think when I first started playing electric, I really decided, well, okay, to parallel what Joe was saying, I learned that I was dealing with another half of my instrument. If I'm playing a violin, the other half of my instrument is the space I'm playing in the hall, and we learn how to use the hall. When you've got a solid body electric, you're going straight to the amp, and so you have to learn how to use the amp. So, I mean, one of the first things that I think when someone's learning to play electric, if you're used to a classical technique of, okay, I'm going to dig in and I'm going to project to the end of the hall, you get used to hearing a sizzle or a noise under an ear. There's a little bit of a kind of core to the sound. If sometimes beginners, that sounds better under the ear, but it's not going to be heard 5 feet away. And so we learn to dig in. Now, if you dig in like that with an amp, you're going to get a lot of high frequency clutter around 1.2 kilohertz. And so you kind of have to dial that back. But I think for me, tone is always a physical relationship. There's a feeling. When I first started playing viola, I realized there were tons of subtle differences between violin and viola. And I got really conscious about it at the time. And I wrote an article, I notated all this stuff. But ultimately what happens is that becomes second nature. So my body is one way when I'm playing viola, another way when I'm playing violin, another way when I'm playing a 6-string electric, another way when I'm playing a 5-string electroacoustic. So there is a feeling. It's like a feeling of what instrument you're playing, what style you're playing, what sound you're going for. And so I think a lot of times, if we are switching back and forth between instruments or different worlds, we also have to develop another technique, which is a switching technique. So in addition to me having a violin body and violin technique and a viola body and a viola technique, I have a technique of I'm now going from violin, now I'm going from viola, so that instantly you snap into the body of the instrument that you're playing. And it's kind of a feedback loop between what you're desiring in your mind in terms of the sound, a feedback loop in your ears of what's actually coming out and coming back to you, and then a physical feedback loop of how your body feels and how it reacts. So we need to be physically alive and aware so that if we're hearing, wow, I'm crunching the sound, I need to let go a little bit more, or wow, I'm really not projecting, I need to use a little more weight. It's all a feedback loop. And so if you're always centering your tone and your technique on what is the sound you want, that will be your guide and you'll find the adjustments. I think Joe also had a good point that you need to learn the gear. When I first started playing electric, I was like reading all these guitar magazines on, okay, here's how you get Eddie Van Halen's tone on Cathedral. Here's how you get the Randy Rhoads tone for Crazy Train solo. And saying, okay, this effect goes before this, and there's these different levels, plus getting some effects to get your hands on. Because another secret to sounding good is, like, we've got to find out ways to EQ the noisy frequencies out. And there's different approaches to that and different solutions. To me, it's generally cut the mids and the highs some, boost the bass, And also I reduce the gain because this adds a lot of noise and gain. Something else that I just wanted to mention about the fear of the fifth, sixth, and seventh strings. A lot of that, there's a couple of things that can be an issue. One is what kind of bow you're using. If I use a thin violin bow, this is my lighter weight violin bow. It's really good for playing Mozart, Haydn, classical rep. It's actually kind of thin-haired. It doesn't have as wide a swath of hair. If I try to engage my viola C string with this bow, I mean, that's okay, but I'm missing depth, I'm missing power, and if I try to play louder, it's going to top out. Whereas if I have a viola bow, and I don't know how much that would carry on the broadcast, but here I can hear there's more of a fundamental, more depth, and it just feels better because my hand and arm are sinking in and it feels good, rather than a feeling of I don't have enough power here. It's almost like if you're driving when I was younger, I had a 79 Caprice Classic station wagon, and at one point you could actually floor it at the accelerator pedal and it still would not go faster. It's like, I need to accelerate, but I don't have it. So, on the other hand, if I use this viola bow and say, okay, I'm going to be playing violin concertos with my viola bow, I have to really lighten up on the E string or I'm going to squash it. But again, it's like my body and my ear and my intention all reacting together. I mean, this is not news to any of you. If you're a violinist, you know that you don't play the E string the same way you play the G string. Your arm's different, your weight is different, even your bow speed or where your sounding point is, whether you're closer to the bridge or further away. So you're already making these adjustments. And I just encourage you, put that into your explorations of electric. One other thing, again, just because we're not having to work the acoustic space, just remember less is more. If we tie ourselves up and try to do more sound, it may actually result in more noise. And so I don't feel like I'm working necessarily anymore when I'm playing the thicker strings on electric. A lot of that is about balance. And here's another quick little exercise for all of you. Violists and people who play 5 strings or multi-strings are very aware that the bow weight's not enough. We need to use the tip weight. So one exercise that I often recommend people is just hang the bow over your head so that it's all the tip weight is on the floor. You can actually swing the bow like a pendulum. And then when you bring your fiddle back into place, just, again, just bring it there. The tip weight you can feel hanging on the bow towards the floor. And so if I'm pulling the string, letting the tip do some of the work for me, especially when I'm up at the upper half. At the frog, I'm actually balancing so that the tip weight is down and the frog weight comes up in the hand. But that's a way to get more thickness in the sound and more power without pressing down. You're never going to get a good 6th and 7th string sound or 5th string just by pressing down as hard as you can. It's really about, like Chuck said, about the gravity and the weight. So that's a whole lot of word bluster.
That's great.
Yeah.
We did actually have a question from Debbie. She was asking, when you are playing a 7-string electric, do you guys like using a violin bow or a viola bow?
I'm gonna use this question to disagree with Doc. I don't know. I'm pointing which way. I'm going to point Doc this way. This way. He's this way. I actually no. Let me rephrase that. I actually really love what you said, Doc, and I agree with you for most applications. How about that? However, I think when you said it's an interesting. So do we use a violin or a viola bow? So I have two bows here. So here is the Jewel, which is ostensibly meant for 7-string applications. I suspect, well, what for, with what Doc Wallace is saying, many of you will want the Jewel. I personally hate using this bow. I'm actually probably going to try to sell it at some point. Or I'll keep it as like the spare and just be annoyed when I have to, when I have to use it for whatever it is. And I can do everything I do. I can do everything I do on both bows. That doesn't really stop me from doing what I want to do. But let's see if we can. Let's see if this works. This is sort of all, let's see here. Let's see. Is this coming? Let's see. No, this is not coming through. Oh, I didn't set it up. Whatever. So this is just stuff. But anyway, I'll do it acoustically and hope it works out. So when I play, this is an Arcus bow. This is the second bow I use. This is the actual opposite of what Doc was talking about. It's super light. The whole bow is like frighteningly light. And this is actually counter, but I'm going to say that it maybe is only applicable to what I'm doing. So when I'm doing a lot of things like this. So I don't know if that's coming through at all.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. You know what? I have another idea. So
there's exactly one person in the world who's doing that, though, and this is him. There need to be more. You need some more. You need some more disciples.
No one wants to do what I do.
I nominate myself.
All right. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay. It's acoustic. So this is going to be not exactly, it's acoustic, so it's going to be not exactly what we're doing, but can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, so. So this kind of playing requires that you actually dig in as hard as you can for like the millisecond that you're doing this kind of. I am actually going hard. I can't not. Like if I do what Doc says, which is to kind of like, let me get my Jewel. Yeah, great. If I'm doing like slow things, like if I wanted to make a band like Sun, maybe I would act, like you guys know who Sun is, like. For like 30 minutes, right? Like, and you just have this the whole way through. Yeah, then I think it's applicable. But for this kind of like fast work, I actually actively chose to have a really, really crazily light bow. This is like lighter than a Pernambuco bow. The Arcus bow is notoriously like whoop, it's gone. Like it's. I don't have the numbers, but I do know for a fact that it's significantly lighter than.
They're super light. Yeah,
they are super light, and so a lot of it ends up having to do with my arm weight and force, right? But I find ways, and I taught myself how to do this, and it came at a cost. I actually have carpal tunnel in both wrists, so you kids out there. But it did come at a cost. But over time, I did teach myself how to relax in the micro seconds. So turn off, and on again suddenly, off and then on, like really, really like almost like how you learn how to like punch, or like where it's like super relaxed and then you're like on, and then you're off and then you're on again, and in these tiny little moments, these
Yeah, it's like a
literally
micro explosion rather than just this tense thing.
No, I'm never tense, and in the early days I was actually tense, right? And that's how I hurt myself. So I was never tense, but like I explode all the time. It can't be this kind of like let it like let the weight just kind of settle in. It can't. You have to use the force. But like and I'm using like I want to say, so that's the disagreement. And maybe it's not really a disagreement. I don't know, maybe it's just within applications, it's just the knowledge of knowing that you have to apply these things in a different way depending on the context.
I think what it is, I mean, you beautifully illustrated use of arm weight, balance, everything in the right place. And what you said about release is key. I mean, that was one thing Karen Tuttle, my viola teacher, said is for any playing action, you should always ask yourself, where's the release for that? You know, whether it's vibrato, whether it's a bow stroke, but the sense that there's always cycles of rhythm, cycles of release. I think Earl, your point about the jewel bow, a lot of that is about different tools for different applications. You know, if using a heavy viola bow or a jewel for doing what you're doing is like trying to use a monkey wrench for something that you need something much more precision tool, like for surgery or something, you know. And so, and Chuck was talking about, I think, using different bows in different applications. I mean, I've tried all kinds of different bows with my Viper, including Baroque bass bows and cello bows. Tracy Silverman went through a phase where he was playing his 6-string with medieval snakewood short violin bows. And again, that was all at the Frog, very groove playing, but it was fascinating, but it was a similar principle where to get that kind of precise articulation and speed of activity without fatiguing your hand, you know, that worked a lot more wonders. But when he's doing like the John Adams concerto, he needs, you know, I mean, the beauty of the torch style stick is it allows infinite sustain, you know, and so that's the strength of it. And so I think for a lot of us, we're trying to find what is the best compromise that we want for an application. Like for instance, when I was doing a lot of, I mean, Earl and I've both done a lot of gigs with Joe Deninzon, you know, weddings where you would be playing electroacoustic, maybe mic'd with a DPA mic, doing essentially a classical quartet for the ceremony. And then you would do a rocktail hour where you'd plug in and be playing whatever was on the chart with a solid body electric. Now, a lot of times for those gigs, I'd be getting on this Manhattan, you know, A train, taking a subway. And my amp for those gigs was the Roland AC60 because it was about 30 pounds. You could sling it over a backpack. You could lug it up and down stairs. Granted, maybe it's still a bit of a schlep, but you know, it gave you 2 channels, one which had phantom power for an acoustic mic, one of which did not have that. And so it was an amp that let me do everything for that gig. Would it be my ideal amplification system for acoustic? No. Would it be my ideal amp for electric? No. But for gigging amp, it did everything really well. And so, you know, in some senses, the modern torch style violin bow is kind of like that. Does it articulate as well as a Baroque bow? No, it really doesn't. Does it sustain better? Yes. You know, so I think that's another thing is finding your feel of things. I'd also point out Earl was using the tip weight of the Arcus. That was part of what was powering the hand. I think what happens is, as violinists, a lot of times we're used to lifting the bow weight out, because when we're at the frog, when we were beginners, we encountered a scratch. And so the weight we'd send away from the instrument rather than let the bow weight work. The Curtis Institute in Oberlin always required their violin students to play viola. Part of that's because they needed viola for ensembles and orchestras, but part of it was they knew it made you a much more refined player, because a viola will expose a lot of tone production sins that a violin might forgive. And so I think that's one of the first things that I show 5-string violinists and violinists who are learning viola is like, hey, you got some weight up here, and here's how you can engage it. And there's times you don't want to do that. Right now, I'm getting ready. My flute viola harp trio hat trick is recording a new record. We'll be doing the first recording of this piece by Thea Musgrave, one of Scotland's best composers. And the viola part has these passages where I play a few arco notes, switch to pizzicato, back to arco, back to pizz, very limited time to change and catch the string. And it's all happening to the tune of quarter note equals 152. And so for that whole passage, my tip weight's going out here. I'm not engaging the tip at all, but I'm plucking. And then when I come back to the bow, tip weight is up in the air. So again, it's like the hard thing about trying to apply vast general principles technically from one instrument to the other is where you're going to bump into exceptions or points of where something might be a little different. Someone else might need to use less bow, but someone else needs to use more bow. And, every amp can be different.
What I'm hearing from you guys is a lot of it is the same way that you learn to play an acoustic, right? Like you play, and if you like the way it sounds, then keep doing that. If you don't like the way it sounds, then change your technique. So that's one of the things I hear a lot of people like, oh, I don't like my tone. What knob should I turn? These ones first.
It's your ears. I think to answer that the viewer's question, Deborah, right? All of our blather, right, really boils down to really it's up to you. Many people do use viola bows for the extended instruments, but I don't. But that doesn't mean you should do what I do, right? Like because I'm doing it for my own it's like what Doc said. I had sort of priorities to kind of consider. What am I doing, and then what am I choosing to kind of like. Would I like the string to speak easier if I had a heavier bow, like a viola bow or a jewel, right? The string, it's physics or physics. The B flat string would absolutely like speak faster because the weight causes the thick string to vibrate more immediately. But I personally don't do that because I need the speed. I have to react way faster. But you, Deborah, may not be in that position. Like I kind of doubt it actually. So like you don't need to do that. So maybe the viola is the right bow for you, particularly if you want like these thick B flat sounds, right? Then absolutely, but only you can answer that question, really.
I love how she said I was looking for consensus. Like you asked 4 violinists and you were hoping that you would get one answer.
It's only gotta be you, man. It's your ears. I'm not playing your set. Like you have to, like all of us are friends. Me, Chuck, Doc, and Joe, we're all great friends. We vehemently, and Matt, not all of us except Matt. Matt's kind of a whatever. Screw that guy. But we're all great friends, and we all absolutely disagree with each other on like a lot of key things, like I mean, like not what physics does. I mean, like none of us here are flat earthers, for example, but like that the physics is that a heavier bow will make the string speak faster, right? But only you can decide whether that is gonna fit your requirements. Nobody in this discussion is gonna tell you like they're gonna say, well, Deborah, what you really ought to do is, you should get my brand violin, and this is my bow, and like this is gonna cause you to be a real rock star. Get out of here. kind of crappy
Deborah,
back.
you should buy Earl's jewel bow at a deep discount and ask him to sign it. And if it doesn't work, sell it on eBay for a profit. How's that for consensus building?
Boom. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's only you. You have
It's
to guide.
personal.
You're guide.
Yeah, everything's a trade-off. You have to decide, I'm giving up this to get this. Which one do I need more? Chuck.
To bring it back around, I'll keep it shorter this time. The number of options, instruments, number of strings, bows, pedals, amps, or not, digital simulations, the amount of options these days can be bewildering. But the purpose of all of that is absolutely the same as it's been for hundreds of years. We have people who really like Strads as opposed to Guarneris. We have people who die on the hill of Guarneris over Strads. We have some people who really dig modern Italians. We have with lots of different instruments, with lots of different bows, different strings to produce different types of musics in the way that feels the most appropriate to the performer. So don't be afraid of all the options. That just gives you more ways to find your own niche.
Yeah, I think the variability in like acoustic violins and bows is like here. And the variability in electrics and amps and like the variability is massive. And that's great. It allows you to have a lot more control over what you sound like. But it can also mean that like by accident, you could end up really far from where you want to be.
There are many, many more worlds to conquer.
And the fact that everybody's here on the electric, violin site is that you're already, I would assume by nature, looking to explore other, other sonic roads, right? So like if let that be your sort of North Star, right? Like you're looking to explore more things. So your ears and your thing is your guide. And then the tech, like I think Doc said, the technique follows, right? That, so I think in order, when people ask which EQ should I get, definitely I don't want to dismiss the idea of like, well, you should just figure it out yourself. That's also not helpful. I definitely get that, right? Like it's not helpful. But at the same time, you'll hear people say this one has this effect, this one does this, and then this one does that, right? Like the Empress EQ does this and blah, whatever, right? So then what I would like to advise is that you take that information and you say, well, okay, what am I looking for? What kind of sound am I trying to like get, like, so that original bow question, right? Like what is your application? But you do need to know what does a viola bow do? Why is an Arcus bow like that? Is it so light? What's the effect? What happens there? Do I want that? Yes or no? You know what I mean? Like, and then you figure out yes or no. But where I feel like these forums or live streams are helpful is that you get a quick way to the answer of like, so you don't feel overwhelmed, like Chuck was saying, like where you go, okay, well, I don't know what is the effect of a viola bow on the 7 strings, and now you got your answer. So
something else I think that's helpful on this whole topic of technique is separating the physical technique and the gear and the electronics. I like to practice electric stuff totally unplugged, no amplification whatsoever. I mean, when you heard Earl demonstrate that chugging, even though that was totally unamplified and just from a mic, every note was clear, every rhythm was clear, every attack was precise, every release was the exact rhythm and everything. No need for compression, no need for anything. It was all technically worked out physically according to his intention. Same thing, like I was thinking about some of the up and coming electric violinists that I had the privilege of teaching for some of their time at Berklee. Both Serena Z and Mia Sano worked with me privately. And I realized that in a lot of their lessons, we were working on this stuff acoustically. even if it was me as saying, okay, I'm navigating the 7 strings and how do I do this comfortably, we were not plugged in. And then when we were working on sound and gear, it was very much in the box, in the computer, learning about audio, learning about processing, listening to recordings, remixing, putting different effects on in the box. So that in a sense, that was separate from the act of playing, because realistically, unless you're in an arena or a space or a warehouse where you can really open your amps up, it's not the same thing, and so if this is clean and your concept in your ear is solid and you know how to dial in and make changes to what's coming out of the speakers, then that kind of circumvents the frustration of this is not producing what I'm wanting to hear, because it may not be this fault. It might be the gear, it might be the box, it might be the settings. And again, a lot of that, you can't short circuit the learning curve. I remember Tracy Silverman once telling me, I spend 3 times as long working on my sounds as I actually do practicing the pieces. And it shows when you hear him play. Every sound's gorgeous. It's him. It's what's intended. But that's the investment of time. And I think it also saves hours of frustration, because, I mean, even on an acoustic instrument, you've probably had that experience of getting your bow rehaired or putting on new strings and then getting mad at yourself because you realize you've been wrestling against something that was making your life harder, and you thought it was you, but it wasn't. You just needed to change your strings, get some fresh hair, get some new rosin. So, really be discerning. But again, start from the ear, start from the concept, and then chase that.
Yeah, great stuff. Any closing thoughts from anybody? I think Chuck's got to get to a rehearsal here, right? You got any closing thoughts, Chuck?
It's your journey. Try everything. The worst thing that could happen is that you'll try something and you'll realize that you never need to try that particular kind of bow again, or you never need to try that particular type of distortion pedal again, or you'll learn that, you know what, I really do not like the sound of Marshalls on fiddles, but I love Mesas. So even you will learn something by trying everything.
Yeah, and with Amazon's return policy, like, there's no excuse to not be trying stuff. Try it. You'll know pretty quick whether you like it or not. If you don't like it, send it back.
And even if so like what Chuck said, my closing thought is that, like, the first time I tried an electric instrument, I bought a Zeta. I bought it all from the same place. Sam Ash used to sell Zetas, right? So I bought a Zeta from Sam Ash, and I bought, get this, you're gonna laugh like hell, you guys. I bought, my first pedal was a Metal Zone pedal. I should have saved that Metal Zone pedal, because that Metal Zone pedal is worth a lot of money now. But like, I didn't save that Metal Zone pedal because it sounded like garbage. I said to the guy, so I asked the sales clerk, I want to sound like James Hetfield. That was literally the first thing I asked. So, it's just, in hindsight, that's a really stupid thing to say, I think. Like, I want to sound like James Hetfield. But that's where I started with the whole thing. So, like, to echo Chuck, don't be afraid to start. Just start. What's the worst? You talk to a guy at, like, Guitar Center or Sam Ash, like, that guy actually knows what he's talking about. It's fine. It all worked out.
Yep. True. Doc, any closing thoughts?
I just keep listening and learning and exploring, and be part of the community. And, there's lots of opinions, and yours is the one that matters. So.
Man, thank you guys so much for doing this.
Matt
it's
Bell,
beautiful to see your faces.
Thanks, Matt Bell.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming. We text each other a lot. I don't always get to see your faces, so this makes me happy. I saw Earl like a couple weeks ago. I've seen Chuck a few weeks ago. Doc, we got to get together.
Yeah, I think it's been 2019 probably.
Oh.
Or no, Asta.
That was your wedding.
Last March. That was that too.
Yeah.
Wedding and Asta 2022. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Asta 2023.
We need to get in a room again together. Yeah.
Sounds good.
We did have a question about Earl. Like they would love to hear you doing that chugging on an acoustic instrument. We may have to do a stream where you talk about just that chug technique because nobody else is doing that. Everybody's trying to do the same thing, is using ricochet.
No, that ricochet doesn't work. Absolutely not. I'm very, very vehemently opposed to ricochet. I used to do ricochet when I first started. I had a metal band back in the day that had no guitars, and so this is the beginning of me trying to riff like that, right? So I also was doing the sort of ricochet technique, but then when you look at the wave files and you listen, then you don't even look at the wave files, just listen to the sound. It's like super not brutal. It's super not brutal, and it doesn't work. I'm gonna die on that hill. That's so people have disagreements with whatever. That's the hill I die on. It doesn't work. Sounds like crap.
But Earl does teach. So you guys, if you want to reach out to him, he can teach you. He's a teacher.
Maybe. Am I a teacher? I don't know. I'm too grumpy.
Well, that's perfect for violin, right?
For some teachers, that's a prerequisite.
Oh my God, no, they all did.
When there's E strings in the room, yeah.
But yeah, so all right, so the chug technique, I guess I guess it's a separate thing, but you know, it's I'd be happy to do a separate live stream on it. I don't honestly know. I've never had to really. Tracy Silverman asked me to kind of like put it into words, and kind of like, you know. So there is a page in his really nice book, Strumboing, on it, but it's there's a lot that's missing. Not because I was holding out on Tracy, but you know, but there's just stuff missing because you can't. And even in a live stream, I don't think it's. You just kind of like you hear the sound, and you just kind of like make it happen. And then I learned through recording and like live shows what worked, what didn't, you know. So
awesome. Fellas, thank you again. We'll be texting soon. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And we will see you next week.
take care, everybody.